A blanket of morning mist covered the quiet countryside as the sound of rustling leaves and distant bird songs created a serene backdrop. The camera pans across an old wooden fence, its paint peeling with age, and focuses on a weathered barn standing like a sentinel of forgotten stories. Then, the faint sound of hooves echoes. At first, it's barely noticeable, soft, uneven, almost hesitant. But as the camera draws closer, a silhouette emerges, a horse, standing alone in a small, barren paddock. Its head hangs low, its ribs faintly visible beneath a dusty coat. This is no ordinary horse. This is a survivor. You see, this horse didn't just stumble upon hard times, it was thrust into them. Neglect, fear, and pain were once its constant companions. Its story wasn't written in stables of luxury or fields of freedom, but in cramped spaces and broken promises. But here's where it gets interesting. Despite the shadows of its past, there's a spark in its eyes, faint but undeniable, a flicker of resilience that refuses to be extinguished. As the video unfolds, we meet the person who would forever change the horse's life. A quiet figure steps into the paddock, their movements slow and deliberate. No words are spoken at first. The air is thick with unspoken tension, as if both horse and human are holding their breath. The person kneels, holding out a hand, palm up. No ropes, no commands, just an invitation. And for a moment, nothing happens. The horse doesn't move. The world seems to stand still. But then, something incredible begins to unfold. A single step. The horse hesitates, its ears flicking nervously, but curiosity takes over. Another step. The camera zooms in on the person's face, a mixture of patience, hope, and a quiet determination to rebuild trust that has been shattered for far too long. The horse's nose inches closer until, finally, it brushes against the outstretched hand. It's the faintest touch, but it carries the weight of years of mistrust melting away, piece by piece. The person speaks for the first time, their voice gentle, almost a whisper. I know you've been hurt. But you're not alone anymore. And in that moment, the horse's journey begins, a journey not just of rescue but of healing, transformation, and discovery. But here's the twist, what happens next is something no one could have predicted. This horse, once abandoned and broken, is about to do something extraordinary. Something that will challenge everything we think we know about second chances. Stay with us, because this is a story you won't forget, a story that will inspire, surprise, and perhaps even change the way you see the world. The days turned into weeks, and the bond between the horse and its new caretaker grew stronger. The once timid animal now responded to soft words and gentle gestures, following its rescuer around the paddock with cautious trust. Each step it took toward recovery felt like a small victory. The caretaker worked tirelessly, not just to restore the horse's physical health, but to heal the invisible scars left by years of mistreatment. Slowly but surely, hope began to replace the fear in the horse's eyes. It was learning to live again, to trust again. But just as everything seemed to be falling into place, something unexpected happened. During a routine checkup, the caretaker noticed the horse behaving strangely, not in fear, but with a sudden intensity, almost as if it was trying to communicate something urgent. It pawed the ground and whinnied softly, its gaze darting toward the nearby woods. The caretaker paused, watching the horse closely. This wasn't ordinary behavior. It felt purposeful, almost deliberate. Curiosity won out, and the caretaker decided to investigate. Grabbing a flashlight and calling softly to the horse, they walked toward the edge of the woods. The horse followed without hesitation, its hooves crunching softly against the fallen leaves. The air grew cooler under the canopy of trees, and an eerie stillness settled around them. And then, just as they were about to turn back, the horse stopped abruptly. It froze, ears pricked forward, staring intently at a thicket up ahead. What they found next would change everything. As the caretaker pushed through the underbrush, they came upon a clearing, and there, in the fading light, was another horse. But this one was different. It was wild, its coat dark and unkempt, its eyes fierce and untamed. The horse from the paddock stepped forward, its movements slow and deliberate, as if recognizing a kindred spirit. The two animals stood face to face, their breaths visible in the cool evening air. For a moment, it was as if time stood still. And then came the twist. The wild horse wasn't alone. From the shadows emerged two foals, their legs wobbly, their frames thin. They stood close to their mother, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. It was clear they were in dire need of help, malnourished, skittish, and vulnerable to the harsh elements. The caretaker's heart sank. This wasn't just a discovery, it was a call to action. The stakes had suddenly been raised. Rescuing one horse had been a challenge, but now there were 4 lives hanging in the balance, each one carrying its own story of survival and struggle. Could they be saved? And what had drawn the rescued horse to this very spot? Was it coincidence, or was there something deeper at play, an instinct, a connection beyond human understanding? As the caretaker stood in the clearing, the gravity of the situation set in. Resources were limited, and time was running out. The wild horse and her foals were clearly wary of humans, making any attempt to help them a delicate and potentially dangerous task. Yet, in the midst of uncertainty, there was a glimmer of hope. The rescued horse, the one who had once been broken and afraid, now seemed to take the lead. It stepped closer to the wild family, its movements calm and reassuring, as if saying, "It's going to be okay. Trust me." And just like that, the story took a new turn. What began as one horse's journey to healing had become something much greater, a mission to save an entire family. But how would the caretaker manage it? What challenges lay ahead? And most importantly, would this fragile thread of trust between human and horse be enough to rewrite their fate? The answers were still unknown, but one thing was certain: this was only the beginning of a story that would test the limits of courage, compassion, and the power of second chances. The days that followed were a whirlwind of effort, patience, and uncertainty. The caretaker worked tirelessly to gain the trust of the wild horse and her foals. Every approach was slow, deliberate, and respectful of the fragile boundary that separated fear from trust. The rescued horse played a crucial role, acting as a bridge between the wary family and the caretaker. It was remarkable to see how the once broken animal now seemed to understand the stakes, stepping into a role of quiet leadership. Progress came in small victories. The foals grew curious, inching closer with each passing day, and the mother began to soften, lowering her guard just enough to allow the caretaker near. The wild horse's eyes still held a spark of defiance, but now there was something else too, a glimmer of hope, perhaps born from watching her foals begin to trust. Slowly but surely, the caretaker was able to provide them with food, water, and the first steps towards safety. But just as it seemed the family might be saved, disaster struck. A powerful storm rolled in without warning, the kind that shakes the earth and drenches everything in its path. The winds howled through the woods, and the rain fell in relentless sheets. The caretaker, now soaked to the bone, scrambled to lead the horses to shelter. The rescued horse followed willingly, but the wild horse hesitated, her foals huddled close to her legs. Lightning cracked across the sky, and for a moment, chaos reigned. It was then that the rescued horse did something extraordinary. Ignoring the storm, it turned back and stood beside the wild horse, its presence calm and steady. It nickered softly, a sound almost lost in the roar of the storm but powerful enough to reach through the mother's fear. The wild horse looked at her foals, then at the rescued horse, and finally at the caretaker, who stood waiting with open arms and a promise of safety. With a deep, trembling breath, she stepped forward. One cautious step, then another, until the entire family was moving toward the barn. Inside, the storm raged on, but the barn provided a sanctuary. The caretaker worked quickly, drying the horses and ensuring they were warm and fed. As the hours passed and the storm began to fade, a sense of relief washed over the small group. The wild horse and her foals were safe, their trust hard-earned but now unshakable. And just when it seemed the story had reached its resolution, the final twist revealed itself. In the calm after the storm, as the caretaker gently brushed the wild horse's coat, something caught their eye, a faint but unmistakable brand hidden beneath the dirt and tangled hair. It was an old mark, one that told a story of its own. This wild horse hadn't always been wild. She had once belonged to someone, her life intertwined with humans before being lost to the wilderness. Suddenly, pieces began to fall into place. The rescued horse, the wild mare, and even the foals, they weren't strangers brought together by chance. Somehow, they were connected. Perhaps they had known each other in another time, another life. The caretaker's mind raced with questions, but the answers would remain a mystery. What mattered most was that they were together now, a family forged through adversity and bound by a shared resilience. As the camera lingered on the reunited horses, the rescued horse nuzzled one of the foals, a quiet act of tenderness that spoke volumes. This wasn't just a rescue mission, it was a story of redemption, of bonds that couldn't be broken, and of second chances that could heal even the deepest wounds. And as the sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden light over the barn, one thing was clear: this was a new beginning for them all, one filled with hope, love, and the promise of a brighter future. The storm had passed, leaving the world drenched and still. The caretaker stood at the barn door, watching as the horses settled into the quiet calm. The rescued horse seemed at ease, its once nervous movements now replaced by a steady grace. The wild horse stayed protectively close to her foals, but her eyes no longer held the same mistrust. It felt like a triumph, a hard-fought battle won against fear and uncertainty. But just as relief began to settle, a distant noise broke the silence. The caretaker turned toward the sound, their hearts skipping a beat. It was the low rumble of an approaching vehicle, its headlights piercing through the fading mist. The sound stirred something in the wild horse, who raised her head sharply, her body tensing. The foals pressed against her sides, sensing her unease. The caretaker moved quickly, stepping between the horses and the oncoming truck, unsure of what or who was arriving. The vehicle rolled to a stop, and a man stepped out, his boots crunching against the wet gravel. His weathered face and confident stride suggested he was no stranger to the land or to horses. He scanned the barn, his eyes landing on the wild mare. A flicker of recognition crossed his face, and he approached slowly, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "I've been looking for her," the man said, his voice steady but tinged with something deeper, regret perhaps. He explained that years ago, the wild horse had belonged to him. She'd been part of a small herd he'd cared for until a devastating wildfire tore through the area, forcing them to flee. He had searched for weeks, hoping to find her, but eventually he'd given up, believing she was lost forever. Now, by some twist of fate, she had returned, bringing her foals and her story with her. The caretaker felt a knot tighten in their chest. The bond they had built with the horses had been hard-won, and the thought of letting them go felt impossible. But as the man stepped closer, the wild mare didn't shy away. Instead, she watched him carefully, her ears flicking forward, her body relaxing just slightly. It was clear she remembered him. For a moment, the barn was silent, the weight of the decision hanging in the air. The caretaker glanced at the rescued horse, who stood calmly, as if waiting for what would come next. And then, an idea sparked, a compromise that might honor everyone involved. The caretaker spoke carefully, explaining the journey that had brought the wild mare and her foals to safety. They suggested a partnership. The horses would remain under the caretaker's watch, with the man's support to ensure they had everything they needed to thrive. The man considered the proposal, his expression softening as he looked at the foals, who peeked curiously from behind their mother. Finally, he nodded. "That sounds fair," he said. "She's found her way here for a reason. Maybe this is where she's meant to be." As they shook hands, the unexpected twist revealed itself. The man paused, his gaze shifting to the rescued horse. "That one," he said quietly. "She was part of my herd too. I'd know her anywhere." The caretaker's breath caught. It all made sense now, the connection between the two horses, the way the rescued horse had led them to the wild mare. They weren't just kindred spirits, they were family, separated by tragedy and reunited by fate. The realization brought a rush of emotion, a profound sense of closure that felt like the final piece of a puzzle falling into place. In the days that followed, the horses began a new chapter together, their stories intertwined in ways no one could have foreseen. The rescued horse, once broken and lost, had become the cornerstone of something far greater, a story of survival, redemption, and the unbreakable bonds that connect us all. And as the sun set over the paddock, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, it was clear that this wasn't just the end of their journey. It was the beginning of a life filled with love, trust, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. The days following the reunion brought a new rhythm to the caretaker's life. The once quiet farm now hummed with activity and purpose. The horses seemed to thrive in their shared space, their bonds deepening with each passing day. The wild mare, though still cautious, allowed herself moments of peace, grazing in the open field while her foals explored under the watchful eyes of their mother. The rescued horse, now fully embracing its role as a guide, often led the younger ones to patches of sweet grass or shaded spots under the old oak trees. It was a sight that filled the caretaker's heart with quiet pride. The man who had arrived with the storm became a familiar presence around the farm. Though his initial visit had been fueled by the past, his decision to stay was rooted in the present. He helped repair the old barn, ensuring it could withstand future storms, and worked alongside the caretaker to secure the paddocks. It wasn't just about the horses anymore. It was about creating a sanctuary where all of them, caretaker, man, and animals, could find solace. Over time, the foals grew stronger, their once fragile frames filling out with proper care and nourishment. They were curious and playful, often nudging the caretaker with their soft noses or galloping in bursts of energy across the paddock. Their joy was infectious, a constant reminder of the resilience that had carried them through the darkest times. Watching them run, their small bodies silhouetted against the setting sun, felt like witnessing a miracle. But life on the farm wasn't without its challenges. There were nights when the wild mare would stand by the paddock's edge, staring into the woods as though searching for something or someone left behind. On those nights, the caretaker would sit quietly nearby, offering companionship without intrusion. It was clear that healing wasn't a straight path, it was a journey, one that required patience and understanding. The man, too, carried his own burdens. He often spoke of the wildfire that had taken so much from him, not just his herd, but a piece of himself. Yet, as the days turned into weeks, he began to open up, sharing stories of the horses he'd cared for, the dreams he'd had for them, and the heartbreak of losing them. The caretaker listened, finding in his words echoes of their own journey with the rescued horse. In their shared experiences, they found a quiet camaraderie, one built not on words but on a mutual respect for the lives they had been entrusted to protect. As the seasons changed, the farm transformed into a haven. The fields, once overgrown and wild, became lush with grass and dotted with flowers. The barn, now sturdy and freshly painted, stood as a symbol of renewal. Visitors began to arrive, neighbors, children, and even strangers drawn by the story of the rescued horse and her newfound family. The caretaker welcomed them, sharing the journey not as a tale of tragedy but as one of hope and redemption. People would often leave the farm with a renewed sense of purpose, inspired by the resilience of the horses and the kindness that had brought them back to life. One day, as the foals chased each other across the field, the caretaker noticed something unusual. The rescued horse stood at the top of a small hill, its ears pricked forward, its gaze fixed on the horizon. It let out a low, soft nicker, and the wild mare responded immediately, raising her head and trotting to join her. The foals followed, their playful energy replaced by a quiet curiosity. The caretaker and the man exchanged a look, then followed the horses toward the hill. What they saw when they reached the top took their breath away. In the distance, emerging from the edge of the woods, was another horse. Its coat was dark, its frame lean but strong. It moved cautiously, pausing every few steps as though unsure of its welcome. The wild mare let out a loud whinny, a sound filled with recognition and emotion. The new horse froze, then responded with a call of its own, picking up its pace until it reached the edge of the paddock. The caretaker quickly opened the gate, stepping back to let the wild mare approach. The two horses touched noses, their breaths mingling in the cool air. There was no doubt they knew each other. Perhaps they had been separated during the wildfire, each surviving in their own way, only to be reunited now through a series of events no one could have predicted. The foals pranced nervously but soon joined their mother, nuzzling the newcomer, as though sensing the bond between them. For the caretaker and the man, it was a moment of pure awe. The farm, which had once been a place of isolation and struggle, had become a beacon, drawing together lives that had been scattered. It was a reminder that even in the face of loss, there was always the possibility of reunion, of wholeness restored. The days that followed were filled with quiet joy. The new horse settled in quickly, fitting seamlessly into the rhythm of the farm. The foals, now with an additional protector, grew bolder, their playful antics bringing laughter to everyone who watched. The wild mare seemed at peace for the first time, her family complete once more. And the rescued horse, the one who had started it all, stood as a silent testament to the power of second chances. As the sun set on another day, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, the caretaker stood by the paddock, watching the horses graze. The man joined them, his face softened by the golden light. Neither spoke, but they didn't need to. The scene before them said everything about resilience, about love, and about the beauty of lives intertwined. And so, the farm continued to thrive, a place where broken things were mended, where trust was rebuilt, and where hope found a way to shine, even in the darkest moments. The story of the rescued horse and her family didn't end, it simply became part of something greater, a legacy of compassion and strength that would endure for years to come.